I was influenced greatly in the 1960s, studying free market economics, also studying medicine at the time. Being in the military, I was in the military for 5 years, saw what was happening here domestically in our country with the riots and the disturbance here, as well as the resentment toward the war going on in Vietnam. But also saw it in economic terms in the 70s, because in the 60s we had the introduction of the new entitlement programs under Johnson, as well as the war, and they kept saying you can have guns and butter, it's no problem, we can pay for it, we're a rich country. But the 1970s proved out that it was difficult and was very costly, and there was a payback, and there was a lot of inflation, a lot of unemployment, high interest rates, and a lot of people very unhappy, which ushered in the Reagan era at the time where the people asked for a change in direction. I see us facing that same type of problem right now, because in the last decade, even after conservative Republicans were elected, our job was supposed to be to cut back on the size of government, but we failed that. And if we are going to survive as a party, we better get back on track and defend these principles that used to be the Republican Party, and that is defending liberty and our Constitution. But unfortunately, we went the same way that the Democrats have gone in a long time. We have endorsed the idea of war and increased welfare, and right now the payback is starting. We are witnessing a change. I think there are big events occurring at this very moment, dealing with our dollar, with our economy, the attack on the problems that we have overseas, and something has to give. All great nations end not because they are invaded, but they end because they extend themselves too far. They get too bold and they think that they are so good and so great that we can tell other people how to live. That's not our purpose. We don't tell other people or force other people how to live. What we should do is set a good example here so others would want to follow our way. But because we have pursued this foreign policy of interventionism, and we've now bogged down once again in wars that shouldn't be fought, we're involved in Afghanistan, it's not going well. They pretended that last year was a grand year, a turning point, another mission accomplished in Iraq. And guess what? It was our worst year ever. More deaths last year. So we can't fool ourselves. We have to admit the truth. If a mistake has been made, we have to face up to it and change the methods of what we're doing, change our policy, and get our troops home from Iraq. And when we recognize that we want the empire to come to an end, it doesn't mean just bringing our troops home from the Middle East. It's about time we brought our troops home from Korea, Japan, and Europe. We can save not tens of billions, but hundreds of billions of dollars. That money needs to be spent here at home is where that money needs to be spent. The middle class is hurting, and it's hurting because of our monetary system and our economic system and because of our foreign policy. If we want to save the middle class, which is characteristic of a free society, the freer you are and the better the markets are, the larger the middle class is. But guess what's happening? The middle class is shrinking, and they're not becoming the rich class, they're becoming the poor class. That's why we have to reverse these trends that we are bogged down in today. People who say that we shouldn't leave, they're calling this leaving before the job is done. Some even indicate, I think the individual that said this happens to be one of the other candidates, and I wouldn't dare say his name, But he thinks we should stay for 100 years if necessary. Where is he going to get the money? How much more can he tax us? How much more can he inflate? How much more can he borrow? He has to look at history. We have to realize this comes to an end. Why wait for it to come to an end in a disaster and a collapse of our system? Let's bring it to an end gracefully with common sense and following the Constitution. The argument is that if we leave Iraq, there'll be chaos in Iraq. I would say if we stay in Iraq, the chaos will continue. You know, we were told that we had to go to war because of 9/11. Of course, everybody knows. They couldn't even try to claim that anymore. Everybody knows that Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And everybody knows now there were no weapons of mass destruction and there was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. If that is true, and there was no aggression against the United States, and we didn't pay any attention to the Constitution, the war is undeclared, that makes the war illegal, immoral, impractical, and we can't afford it, so we need to end it. You know, in the year 2000, Republicans took over the White House, and of course we got hold of the House and the Senate, and we were supposed to change things. And the foreign policy program of the year 2000 was strong criticism against nation building and being the world's policeman and interfering in internal affairs of other nations. We were strongly critical of Bill Clinton. And lo and behold, what have we done? Exactly the same thing. Now we're involved in much more major wars. We're involved in Iraq, we're involved in Afghanistan, and it is endless. But not only that, is we're involved in too many other places. Just think of the mess that we have in Pakistan. Why do we feel so obligated that our taxpayers have to be used to prop up military dictators like Musharraf? We are told that we have a responsibility to spread our goodness around the world through force by the use of arms, that we should force democracy on other countries. At the same time, we're fighting wars to support military dictators that overthrew democratically elected leaders. But we've been doing it for way too long. It started in 1953 in our recent history with overthrowing the dictator or the elected leader of Iran and putting in the Shah. And we've suffered the consequences since. But we're very much involved in trying to pick the next dictator in Pakistan. People say, well, if we don't, how are we going to be safe? Well, I say, I'll tell you one thing, the more of that we do, the less safe we are. Terrorism is a real problem, and we need to understand it. But I have come to the conclusion, and so many others have come to this conclusion, by just using some common sense, that terrorism, the threat of terrorism is increased with the current foreign policy. It is not diminished with our foreign policy. The foolishness of our foreign policy requires that our government tax us to the hilt, and then they borrow to the hilt, and then they print the money, and then they go over and they blow up bridges with our money, which drains our economy. At the same time, then we feel obligated that we have to rebuild the bridges that we blew up. What we need to do is quit the blowing up and the building of other people's bridges and build and take care of our own bridges here at home. You know, in the last couple of years, we have been involved in building a new embassy for Iraq. You know, there's hints at times from the administration and others that say, well, we don't want to be there permanently. But we know what's behind the goal of having 14 permanent air bases and Army posts in Iraq. At the same time, we as taxpayers have been asked to pay $1 billion to build an embassy in Baghdad, the biggest in the world, big as the Vatican. Now, does that show a sign that we don't have intention of running their country? It makes no sense whatsoever. What we need to do is just look to our Constitution. The Constitution does not give us authority. There's no authority to do this.